Okay, so we're going to begin week 3 of the 10 foundational meditations. This week is called Focus Out. So, as I've said from the beginning, you can define most meditations by where you direct your attention. You can also add in how you direct your attention, but the main thing is, where are you directing your attention? That's what defines what the meditation is. Why is it meditation? Well, because you're directing your attention with this attitude of acceptance that we talked about last week. And this acceptance is a little more subtle and complex than just the word acceptance as we normally understand it. It's a deeper, more all-encompassing kind of acceptance, more fundamental kind of acceptance. But when you're practicing that kind of acceptance while directing your attention at a chosen object, then you are meditating. And we'll see later on that the object, that our concentration, that our attention might not be narrowed down to just one object, but will always be in some way of controlling the way we use our attention in meditation. So this week, we're going to focus on focus out. I get this term more or less from one of my teachers, Shinzen Young. I don't know if he still does this, but he used to distinguish between our outer sensory world and our inner sensory world. And I find this a useful way to begin learning some of the basic technical aspects of meditation. Sorry, I've been meditating for a little while before you guys got here, so I feel drawn to the silence, which isn't good for talking. So when we focus out, we're going to be focusing on our sensory experience of the external world. By external, we just mean non-mental, non-emotional. So obviously with visual phenomena, it's pretty obvious, we're focusing on we open our eyes and we're focusing on the external visual world we live in. The colors, the lights, the lines, the shapes, the locations, the movement of across the visual space of our experience. Now, we could do with our eyes closed, but then it's just whatever's going along the back of our eyelids, right? So it's just gray. That's more of a rest practice. So mostly to focus out on the visual space, you want to open your eyes. It's not required to do all focus out, because we could just focus on our feeling and close our eyes, or we could focus on sound and close our eyes. But to do focus out on the visual space, we'll want to open our eyes most of the time. Or we could focus on the listening space, the sound space. So with the focus out on the visual space, we'll use a label like see. So we'll just label see as we're seeing what we're seeing. If we're focused on a candle, or we're focused on a tree, or we're focused on a flower, or we're focused on the whole visual space, we'll label it see. As we notice a color, see. As we notice some light, see. Same thing with focus out on the auditory space. We might label it hear. And now we're listening for pitch. We're listening for loudness and softness. We're listening for location, where it is in our mental, where it is in space. We're listening for vibration change, rhythm, timbre of like a voice, a texture of the sound. And we label it here. And then finally, feel. Now, feel is just something we do with our body, and the most obvious feel out is feeling like the seat on the ground, or feeling the air on our skin, or feeling our clothes on our skin. Those are all ways of feeling the outer world. But we also just mean any feeling in the body that's not emotional. Okay, so you might just have some heat going through your muscles. You might just feel your breath. That's a focus out too. Okay, so focusing on the breath is a focus out. It's not, as long as you're not focusing on the emotional aspect of it, you're just focusing on the physical experience of the world in your body. And that's a focus out in the feel space. Now, technically, you could also focus out in other sensory spaces, depending on how many senses you believe we have, but definitely in the smell space or the taste space. Those are a narrower range of experiences when we're meditating than usually, right? There might be some incense or something that you might be smelling. There, of course, could be something environmental. There could be a taste in your mouth. You can be aware of those things as well in the focus out space. If you're doing a very technical practice, you might just label those feel as well. but it'd be fine to label them smell and taste if you wanted to. But we'll focus on feel, hear, and see in our practice. And again, I want to make it clear we're not in any way rejecting those other experiences. If those come up, they can be useful. There are times when a smell will trigger something important, or we'll remember a smell in our history internally. So the smell sense is an important sense, and so is the taste sense. Okay, so to practice, focus out is nice to use as a resource. You might have heard me say, when in doubt, focus out as a resource. It's a resource we can use in our everyday life, because in our everyday life, we have to be engaging with our sensory experience of the outer world. If we want to drive through the streets or talk to another person or eat our food, we have to be able to look at and see and taste and hear the things that are going on around us. So we're always focusing, we're always experiencing the outer world in our senses. If you want to get, if you're getting overwhelmed, if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling challenged, the object of out is always available to focus on. And if you get really good at it in meditation, you can start applying it in your life. If you, yeah, you're feeling overwhelmed at work and you just stop and you start listening just to the sounds of the world around you, just as sounds, just as pitch and rhythm, this can bring you down and calm you down. If you're in a really difficult conversation with another person, this is a very advanced version of this, but you can just start focusing on sight. Focus out, just seeing what their eyebrows look like, just seeing what the color of their eyes is, just seeing the shape of their face. Or you can look down and just focus on their hands and still be engaged, right? And the conversation can be overwhelming, but if you've gotten really good at focus out, and I'll explain why in a second, this will give you a way of getting underneath the story of the moment and getting into the present aspect of the moment. And the present aspect of the moment doesn't have any of the scary problems that our mind thinks are there. Okay, so let's talk about why this is important, or what we're actually doing here. Actually, let me show you a little document. Some of you have seen this before. Those on YouTube probably haven't. Let me share this with you. Now, there's a lot of elements in this document you can just ignore, but I want to talk about it in general. So one of the main things we can learn with focus out, and we've already talked about this a little in the first couple, is the ability to turn our attention to basic sensory data. I keep saying that over and over again. This is what we're doing on this meditation ladder. So narrative reality up at the top of this ladder, if you can see that, yeah, that is where we live our life. I am Chris Kelly and I am teaching a class. I am going to work. I have got to eat something. Our mind is just constantly narrating what we're doing, and we're organizing our life by this story that we're telling. All day long, we do that. Oh, I'm hungry. I need to go get something to eat. Oh, my foot hurts. Oh, that person's kind of a jerk. I wonder why they're being a jerk. I bet, right? Just a constant narration of what our life is. This is where we live. Our life is seen through this story. Immediately, you take in the sensory information, and before you even know it, your mind has already put it into the story. So you're experiencing our world through the story, the narration of your life. And it's not just linguistic narration, there's also images and feelings that are laid over the top as well. So you're immediately seeing things as good and bad, you're seeing them in positive or negative lights, you're seeing them in fearful or desirous lights, right? So emotional lights. But that's all part of narrative reality, the way where we normally live. And this is why you can see that meditation is a fairly radical transformation of our experience of life, because we are practicing dropping underneath our narrative reality and going down, 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 and we're trying to get to reality. That's where we want to directly experience reality itself. Now, the simplest way to get really far down this ladder is to concretely attend to very basic sensory experience. Now, that doesn't get us underneath the ladder down into these places. It doesn't get us directly to reality because we're still mediated by our senses, but it gets us underneath our belief, all the narrative reality gets us underneath our beliefs and our desires and our emotions. It gets us underneath our sense of good and bad, and it gets us all the way down to the concrete experience of what's happening in this moment. Maybe I'll come back to this in a second. So just let's talk about the sort of scientific understanding of what happens when we have an experience. You don't even have to believe this, but this is a useful way to think about what we're doing in meditation. Information from the outside world impinges on our nervous system. So light comes in and it hits my eyeballs, which is part of my brain, and then what happens? Well, there's some processing in the eyes, there's some processing in the lower brain, there's some processing that goes on in the brain to help me understand what I'm seeing. And then there's processing that goes on in the narration, right? The what's good and bad and what it is. It starts naming everything, conceptualizing it. And then at the very top of that, it puts it into your story. I am here, Chris Kelly is here, and this is the world and how it affects me. Right. So by the time you get like one little photon in your eye, collection of photons in your eyes, just this basic physical element of the world. And by the time it's gotten into your brain, you're saying something like, I've won the lottery, right? Okay. So like there's a huge novel of story gets piled onto every little sensory experience. And that's how we organize our life, and it's very useful. We're not telling you should never do that. You have to do that kind of thing. That has to happen in your body mind for you to function in the world. What we're practicing here is, what is it like to not live that way? And there, as we keep going with these techniques, you'll see what some of those benefits. But just right now, let's say, what would it be like to actually see reality as it is before I add all the story? So just in that story I've told you of how we get information from the external world, what we would want to catch is the moment we experience a sense before we've laid any of the other stuff on it. Ideally, and we did this in acceptance last week, ideally before we've even said it's good or bad, we want to experience it. And that's how we get to equanimity. These are sensory information, but they're not good or bad. They are just, what are they? Their color, their light, their shape, their movement. That's in visual realm. They're just pitch, loudness or softness, their rhythm, their vibration in my skin, their heat, their cold. Those things intrinsically to themselves are not good or bad, and they don't have any story to them until you add them to your memories and your future hopes. You let go of all that and you come right into the present moment and you experience exactly the sense that is happening right this moment. You get down, you drop down that ladder underneath all the stories, all the concepts, all the beliefs and desires, all the sense of what's good or bad. Now, when we focus out, we can choose. So I've described see, hear, and feel. And we'll see at some point we could focus on all of that. But to begin, you're going to want to pick one modality. You might just listen to all the sound. You might just see all the see. You might just feel all the feel. But ideally, for most of us, because that's even too much at first, we'll pick one object in the feel space, like our breath. Or we'll pick one object in the feel space, or in the see space, like a candle, or a plant, or a flower, or a pen. It doesn't matter, right? Or we'll pick one object in the sound space. And then we'll focus on it. And we will be then focusing out. And what will we be practicing? We will be practicing catching sensory experience as it happens in the moment before too much of the mind has gotten a hold of it. Now, there's still a little bit of mind there. I just want you to know, because you're still labeling it maybe pitch or heat, right? Those are still concepts. So as we practice hanging out here at the bottom of the ladder, we get really good at hanging out here at the bottom of the ladder. We hope that there's a moment when we can let go of even that concept, when we're just tasting the taste of reality without even having to name any aspect of it. So we're hearing a sound without having to worry about pitch. Like, we're not labeling it pitch. We're not even labeling it here. We just start actually experiencing sound before you even know it's sound, right? That's harder, right? I don't know how to tell you to do that other than you hang around there until you figure out what it's like to experience something non-conceptually, as you see here, non-conceptual sensory experience. But focus out is actually simple. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's simple. All you do is you keep bringing your attention back to what external sensory experience you are having right this second. How does the breath actually feel in my nostrils? How does the breath actually feel in my belly right this second? What does that plane going overhead actually sound like right now? It's got a texture to it. It has a very softness. It feels like it's over there. It stops and comes back a little bit, moment by moment. We pay attention to the sensory experience of the world. So you'll see that breath meditation, basic breath meditation, which we've already done a couple of, is a form of focus out. And we still want to begin our meditation in a resource-oriented way. So you would want to choose a part of your breath, if you were to focus on the breath, that felt comfortable, felt relaxing, felt safe, peaceful. For some of us, the breath doesn't feel that way, but you can see now that you don't need the breath. You could focus on your feet. Focus out. Just feel your feet. Just feel your hands. Just feel your lips. If you wanted to focus on feel. For some of us who've had a lot of trauma, a lot of illness, our body gets scary. And maybe that's not the place to start. So we could focus out in one of the other senses. This is true in life too. Maybe you don't have a lot of trauma, but maybe right today, you're just some pain in your body and your mind just can't. If you focus on your breath, you feel a pain in your back, right? You just can't, your concentration isn't strong enough to pull you out of the pain. But you might find focusing on something outside in the world is easier. So we want to use some wisdom in how we choose. That's why we have the first two techniques here to give you a sense of, like, even if this is what you focus on, if breath is your meditation, you want to know what you're doing. What you're doing is tasting the outside world through the senses before trying to catch it at the very moment that it appears. Trying to catch it at the very moment it disappears and trying to experience it just as it is. That's the acceptance element. Okay, so I've already described this, but we want to go in a little more detail into how you can be really sure that you're getting as close to the bottom of that ladder as possible. And this is why I use words. So we'll use a word like feel, but what is feel? Feel is actually encompassing a whole bunch of other little senses, and I've described some of them. You may use ones that are slightly different than me, but you want to use words that get you right to the core of it. So for instance, feel. Well, a feel is nausea as well. That's not a resource, but that's a very specific word for a type of feel. And there's not really another word for it. You can look into nausea and there might be some heat there. There might be, but nausea itself is a feel. It's a basic kind of a human experience. So is pain. So you want to be looking at it, the very basic experiences that our language has available. We're going to try and get under the language, and different languages might have different words and different people might have different words, but you're going to want to use, hey, what gets me close? So in feel, I really like hot and cold. It's so simple. Sometimes there's just doesn't seem to be a big temperature difference going on in any part of your body, and then it might not be that useful. But if you can tell which side of mine, which nostril is hotter or colder, or is it hotter when I breathe in or when I breathe out? If you're answering that question, the only way you can answer that question truthfully is if you actually taste, experience the heat or the coolness, the difference in the heat or the coolness. So this is where we use these words, hot and cold, pressure. So touch has a feel has a pressure. There's a sense of being pressed upon in the world, right? That's how on our body, if I touch the table, I can press it lightly or I can press it harder. There's more pressure. Right? If I touch the table and I put my phone on my hand, there's more pressure. If I sit down, I can check. If I lean to the right, there's more pressure on my right butt cheek. If I lean to the left, there's more pressure on my left butt cheek. If I come to the center, which has more or less? How subtle can you be aware of? And there's a shape to that pressure that you can explore. There's a point where there's no pressure on the skin, on like part of my butt is just not touching the seat. I can feel, I can find that boundary and experience that. Now, all these are ideas, right? Boundary, seat, leaning left and right. So we want to keep going underneath that until we taste just the experience of pressure. These questions that I'm asking, like which side is heavier or lighter, are a way of directing our attention so you know what you're supposed to be experiencing. But once you've experienced that, okay, well, yeah, I answered that question by noticing this sensation in my body. I noticed this, whatever it is, right? This pure sensation of pressure, of touch in my body to answer that question. That is what I'm directing my attention to with my concentration. Pressure, heat, cold, vibration. There's a kind of tingly, right, vibration in our skin, in our muscles. There's flowing sensations. So there's always change. That's always a possible thing to focus on, and that'll actually be another meditation of ours. But you can always notice that the way that the sensations are changing. Sometimes they seem pretty still and not changing, and so it's not true. They are changing, but it might be easier just to focus on something like, oh, that's the shape of that. There's the boundary. Sound, again, I will go down to the basic concepts. Pitch. Is it a high sound or is it a low sound, right? You can listen to my voice and you can, if you get, we want to get, my teacher Shinzen would always say, subtle is significant. But we want to be attentive to the subtle differences. If we're not attentive to if we're not attentive to the subtle differences, it's very easy as to slip back into our memory of the experience, right? So I feel the pressure on the ground, and then I start just focusing on my memory of the pressure of my butt on the seat rather than what's actually happening right this second. And so that's why we want to attend to the subtle differences that are changing or appearing at every moment. So as you're listening to my voice, I'm a fairly monotone person. It's a fairly natural thing for mid American, you know, dialect of English. But there are times when my voice goes higher and times when it goes lower. It's more subtle in my voice, though. Can you notice that? Can you notice the slight up and down of pitch in my voice? Listening to my voice is a great example of what we're talking about because it's sort of a physical manifestation of trying to get under the story. So as my words come out, there's a part of you trying to understand the words and put them into a story, understand the concept and put them into a story. But when we practice focus out on sound, we're not interested in the meanings of the words. Just like we're not interested in the meanings of a bell or the interest in the meanings of a airplane sound, right? We're like, I hear an airplane going overhead and I say out loud now, it's an airplane, but we're not interested that it's an airplane when we're meditating. We're only interested in what sound is that? Before, there's no way I could know that's an airplane without my memory, right? So it's not that you forget it's an airplane, you just don't pay attention to the airplane, you pay attention to the sound. Same thing with my voice, and this is where it gets hard, but this is a great example of what we're trying to practice. You listen to my voice, and it's not that you're trying to stop understanding, you're just not interested in the understanding. You start getting interested in what is the sound of this? It's a music I'm listening to. There's a musical thing coming through. It is the music of voice. And it's got pitch. It has loudness and softness. Again, I'm a fairly boring speaker, so it's the pitch isn't that much to change, and the loudness and softness isn't that big a difference. But it has stop and start. It has rhythm to it. It has speed, slow, slow and smooth, or staccato. This is an example of what we're doing. We're going down the ladder underneath the meanings that our mind immediately applies to sensory experience or to sounds, and using our attention and our concentration to focus on the sounds before they attain meanings. This will be very important when we start to focus in and start to have to attend to our own mind and our own feelings. So what we practice and focus out is in an easier category, just like we do with resource, an easier category to stay with the sensory data before stories get involved. If we're just focused on a candle, we're just focused on our breath without too much emotion around the breath, it's easier, right? There's not a whole bunch of stories about our breath. There's not a whole bunch of stories about the candle. The candle is not important to your life goals. The breath may not be important to your life goals, right? In the way you think about it. So it makes it easier, at least at first. Now, if you get very serious about meditation, you'll start to have all sorts of stories about the meditation. And then the breath will be like, how good am I at catching the subtle moment, right? You get caught in a new story. But that story is so different from the other ones. It gives you a reprieve from your normal narrative life. Okay. And then we could practice letting go of that story as well. Okay, finally, I just want to repeat. Focus out. When in doubt, focus out. That's a phrase I use because focus out is a very powerful resource in our life. It's a powerful resource in meditation, but it's one that we can practice in meditation and easily apply. I shouldn't say easily, but simply apply in our everyday life, everyday moment. When any moment in your day, you can stop. If you can stop for 5 seconds, if you can stop what you're doing for 5 seconds, you can try and experience the sensory moment. You can pick one object in your sensory experience, your feet on the ground, the color of a leaf, the sound of a bird, the sound of the wind, and let go of all the things I just said and the names of them and see, can I just experience this sound? Can I just feel this feeling? Can I just see this color? How far down the ladder can I get just for 5 seconds or 10 seconds or 5 minutes or 10 minutes, depending what time you have? This is the power of mindfulness meditation. Mindfulness meditation is designed to be applied all the time. We practice it on the cushion under controlled circumstances because it's challenging at first. Though it's simple, it's challenging. But as we get better at it, We can apply it at all times. And I can apply it now as I'm talking to you, as I'm literally having a conversation and expressing ideas and organizing thoughts. I am still hearing my own voice below the ideas that I'm speaking. I am feeling my own body below the idea of myself. I'm seeing your faces before they are faces because of years of practice of mindfulness. And this gives us a freedom and access to a freedom from our narration. And at first, this will just be experienced as a little bit of space in your life. Usually, you're just immediately taken over by your story of what's bad or good. This is most obvious when we get overwhelmed, but it's true about the smallest things. And to start noticing there's some space. And I know most of you have done enough practice on this call, but for you, those on YouTube who may have never tried this, you don't realize that you can create space between you and your experiences, between you and before you generate your narration. There can be a gap before the story comes in. There can be a gap in your way you experience the world before you say it's bad or good. And this gives you options, gives you a moment where you can almost decide how you want to respond, how you want to experience the world. And with practice, that gap gets bigger and bigger and bigger until you can have the experience of going for extended periods of time without getting caught by your narrative of the world. Just letting your body, mind do what it needs to do in the world, but you're not caught up by that story. Focus out is a really powerful practice because it's both a resource and it's one that is maybe the most easily applicable meditation there is to apply in everyday life. And finally, it lays the groundwork for focusing in, that is, focusing on ourself, working with our emotions and our thoughts. We really need to understand focus out and have practiced focus out to be able to apply it to our feelings and thoughts. Because when we apply it to our feelings and thoughts, it's the exact same practice, but it's just much more difficult. Okay, so let's practice.